Dude, we have a Dell. It's been a while since we've had a Dell on the channel, and this is actually pretty modern compared to some of the other systems I have. Now, I believe this is a Dell from 2014, and for comparison, the Mac Pro is from 2006, that's from 2003, 2004, and the only other Dell system that I have at least hooked up at the moment is this clamshell Optiplex, which is from 2000 to 2001. So out of all the systems here, this is the most modern one. So what are we going to do with it? Well, we're going to take the hard drive out of it to upgrade the Mac Pro. Definitely a great use of modern computing equipment. Just take the parts out of it to upgrade ancient equipment. So what is the story behind this Dell? Well, I got this quite a while ago, but I haven't really done anything to it. I actually have a couple of clips of when I initially got it. It was very dusty, very filthy. I cleaned out the majority of the dust without disassembling anything because, well, at the time I wasn't planning on using it immediately. And this is a Dell Optiplex 3020, and I believe this is a 4th generation Intel processor. So we have an i5 inside the system, and I'm not entirely sure about the rest of the specifications, but there is one thing that I know for certain, and it has a 1 terabyte hard drive, which is also not original to this machine. Inside the Dell, it is significantly cleaner than how it was initially, and I'll show you a couple of clips of how it was. It was bad, but thankfully most of the dust has since been removed, and it was especially dusty in the front part here, so that's all taken care of. I know I could do an even deeper clean on this system, but honestly, this is already, a million times better than before. I don't think I really have to explain how bad it was. But what we're after with this Dell is the hard drive. Now, this has a 1 terabyte hard drive. It currently has a copy of Windows 10. Even though this is a very capable system, the hard drive really slows it down, and I actually quite like hard drives. But when it comes to the modern bloated operating systems, you really do have to use an SSD because, unfortunately, the operating systems just aren't as good as they used to be. So I have no problems taking this hard drive out of this Dell because, well, it's only really hindering its performance at the moment. And at the same time, I could really use the storage here in the Mac Pro, especially when it comes to iTunes and other content, because how am I going to say no to a free terabyte hard drive? Now, we can always use this system for something else. Eventually, I would actually like to install probably Windows 7 and or maybe dual boot it to have other versions of Windows as well, because a 4th generation Intel processor is still very capable even today. It's hard to imagine that this is already like a decade old in terms of the actual hardware. Honestly, this is still relatively modern, especially when you compare it to something like a 2004 G5, which is conveniently sitting right here. But even though this is already 2 decades old, I still get some good use out of it. So it really doesn't matter if it's considered obsolete. The fact that it actually works is good enough for me. What's really awesome about these Dell cases is the fact that you can do a whole lot of stuff inside the case without requiring a screwdriver or really any sort of tool. I mean, this is completely toolless, and it has a very nice hard drive caddy. And as you can see, this is obviously not a factory drive because it's from 2012. It's also a Hitachi drive. I don't know what exactly OEM made the hard drives for this era of Dell, because this is the first ever Optiplex of this generation that I have. All of the other Optiplexes and Dells in general are like a decade older at the newest in terms of this. Now, the newer Dells that I have are Inspiron models, which are from the late 2000s, but in terms of actually capable hardware, this is essentially brand new for me. So how exactly are we going to be using the hard drive inside the Mac Pro? Well, if you haven't already guessed, obviously for more storage. But there is one huge upgrade that I can't wait to get to, and it requires this drive because it's going to completely change how I actually use iTunes in general, like not just on the Mac itself, but the way I've been using iTunes has always been on this external drive. Now, this is a fantastic Seagate drive. It uses FireWire as well as USB, but I mean, I'm using FireWire here because obviously we're using a Mac. Every single time that I want to actually use iTunes, which is currently open right now, I always have to power up this drive. Even though it's been working out really well, it does kind of seem like a waste because the hard drive itself can be used for other applications, such as potentially having different versions of macOS for old Mac systems, or acting as a backup drive or something else. Now, the Seagate drive does currently have 2 copies of macOS installed alongside the iTunes library. It's a very messy file system, and honestly, I can't wait to actually fix all of that. And this hard drive is essential because every single thing that I have in iTunes, so everything that is currently in iTunes here, will be transferred onto this hard drive. We have a whole bunch of available space here, and it's going to be very exciting to actually have another drive bay in use because these 3 are completely empty. We only have the first one here, and we're actually going to be using a Mac Pro as intended. By the way, another cool feature about these Dell systems, at least from this generation, do you notice anything similar? We have the G5 here, and obviously you can say the same for the Mac Pro. And then we have the front of this Dell, which has a very similar design language. Seems like they had a similar idea in mind when it comes to the cooling of the case itself. As it is right now, iTunes has always been running really well with this drive, but there are a couple of things that I do want to point out. So first off, there are the 2 partitions. One of them has a Tiger install, which also houses all of the iTunes content. And then we have Untitled 2, which has Sorbet Leopard, and yeah, it's not super ideal. Another thing about the hard drive is that whenever I'm not actively listening to something or using iTunes or whatever, it always likes to spin down and then spin up again. Occasionally you'll hear it combined with the noise of the Mac Pro, which honestly isn't all that noisy considering it's a Pro desktop. It does add up over time, and it does kind of get annoying. Another thing is that even though this has a very fast FireWire 400 interface, it does take a while for it to load. Slowdown isn't terrible, but sometimes if you try to switch between songs pretty fast, or you pause it and then you want to start it again, it'll take a second for it to actually do that. This really hasn't had any issues whatsoever with iTunes. Any slowdown is basically down to the external drive itself. Another noticeable thing about it is that obviously, as you can see, it does take up space here. And even though that's not really that big of a problem considering we have so much space available, I would kind of like to actually optimize this space better. And something that I really want to do is set up a dedicated network area. I'm sure we could still integrate this hard drive somehow. So as you can see, I really haven't had that many issues with iTunes. I just feel like it's finally time to give it the proper upgrade that it deserves, considering we have this awesome machine here with all of these empty drive bays. And it is kind of sad because this has been the main core component of the iTunes library ever since I started this specific library. It goes all the way back to the iMac G3, where I actually started the iTunes library, and well, that G3 has since failed with the power supply, and I still haven't really done anything with it. The library itself is still going to be the same, with all of the mess included, but now it's just going to be internally instead of externally with FireWire, and we can actually make use of this somewhere else. So let's go ahead and power off the Mac Pro. And upgrading this thing is going to be honestly pretty much instantaneous. I don't have to take it out or anything. All I have to do is, well, it's already unlocked. All I have to do is take out the second drive bay, and this is where the hard drive will stay. Typically with the drive cages on the Mac Pro, they usually have a grommet of sorts to minimize vibration. But because this is an original 2006 model, they've pretty much disappeared. They don't exist anymore because it just got old. But it won't be a problem because obviously we can still install this in the Mac Pro as it is. And we just have to align these with the drive. And this is very exciting because This is the first time we will actually be upgrading the Mac itself. Obviously, the Mac itself already has some awesome upgrades, but I haven't done anything to it until now. And just like that, our hard drive is now ready for installation, which will only take like 2 seconds. And just like that, we now have an additional 1 terabyte in the Mac Pro. And like I mentioned, this has a Windows 10 install, but there's really nothing important on it at all. And for the sake of the cooling on the Mac, I will put the door back on and lock it into place. And hopefully, just like every single time I've used it, it should start right up. Nice! Now that is exciting. We actually have a second internal drive now, obviously called Untitled, and I'm pretty sure it's actually reading the Windows information because it's formatted NTFS. But if we open up Disk Utility, there it is, 1 terabyte Hitachi drive. And I think we could actually do a verified disk real quick. And actually it just complains because obviously it's Windows. So let's just format the drive. You know, I haven't even actually thought of what I'm going to call this. I think that iTunes Media is the best because, you know, it describes exactly what it is. It's iTunes Media. So pretty much everything that will run on iTunes will be on this drive. And I'm not just talking about music. I also plan on using it with some retro iOS devices. So obviously, like, everything 32-bit iOS 9 and below, because that is what macOS Lion officially supports up to iOS 9. Now I could do iOS 10, but I would also have to update iTunes or use a different Mac. And right now I'm fine with macOS Lion. Even though I do have iOS 10 devices, I'm using iOS 9 and below more often. And I also plan on having IPSW files and different applications for old iOS on this drive, so they're all in one spot. We now have 1.25 terabytes inside this Mac Pro. And because it's actually formatted now, we can actually try verified disk just to make sure it's fine. Seems to be okay. It was that easy. I do also have one other application here, and it is called Drive Genius. Now, if you haven't heard about this, the first time I opened it up, I was like, whoa. This was back when software was actually cool. And the intro here isn't even the coolest part. If we actually hover over the icons, it's like a whole 3D environment. And with this 3D environment, I actually plan on running the scan here to make sure it's actually all good. And this is so cool. It has like a 3D representation of the science behind scanning the hard drive. And if you wait long enough, it starts to show ones and zeros and different data. Like, this is so cool. How often do you see software like this where they actually put in the efforts to do cool stuff like this? Now this is going to take a while because obviously this is a terabyte hard drive, if it'll actually focus. It says around an hour. Okay, it keeps on going between an hour and like 2 hours. I want to make sure that this drive is completely fine because obviously we don't want to lose our iTunes library. Better safe than sorry. It's only been 13% so far, but as you can see, no bad blocks have been found, which is fantastic. Now, while we wait for the drive check to finish, there is something that I do want to talk about with the Dell, and you can see that we do not have a GPU. However, when I got this, it actually did have a GPU inside it. It wasn't installed, it was actually in the optical drive bay, and it says it's an NVIDIA card, but honestly, this kind of looks like one of those scam cards that you can get online. It says that it's a GT730. However, I haven't done any research into this specific whatever it is. I mean, just look at the font of the NVIDIA logo. That seems a bit off. A lot of the hardware I have is far older than this. This might actually still be good enough, especially for older software and older applications. But I just wanted to mention that because I really don't have any spare graphics cards apart from the ones that are inside the systems. Now, even though we do have one of the drive bays, at least for the hard drives, we don't have the second one, which is unfortunate, but if we install like, you know, a 2.5-inch drive, it won't fit inside the standard 3.5-inch drive bay anyways. The fact that we even have one at all is still nice. It seems like this has actually been upgraded because we have some Corsair RAM, and we do not have any sort of intake here. This is just a dual fan system. We do have an optical drive, as you saw earlier. This is just a standard DVD drive. We don't have any sort of card reader. Nothing here except for USB and some inputs and outputs for audio. The awesome Dell logo, and as we saw earlier, the Intel sticker for that Core i5, and obviously the usual mess of cables. So we have some SATA cables, we have the power cables. Another cool part about the system here is that it is actually rated for 80+ gold, which is actually really cool. So this is not just like some no-name power supply, this is actually pretty decent. And of course it does have the Dell branding. Honestly, just Dells in general aren't really cool machines. It's obviously no Mac Pro or G5, but for a PC tower, even going back to that one over there, these are still really cool, fun systems to use. So out of all of these blocks here, everything is fine on the hard drive. Nothing bad was detected, and this did indeed take over an hour to complete. And just in case you're wondering, yes, it does say 931 here, but in the actual Finder, it has the full capacity of 1 terabyte. That's just a difference between how the program and Finder actually reports the capacity. I also figured, considering we don't have anything on the drive as of yet, why not run the benchmark that is built into Drive Genius? And as you can see, it is pretty much off the charts. And for comparison, I chose the Mac Pro with 3 GHz processors, which is exactly what we have in this system. As you can see, the RAM is a whole other thing. This has 8 GB as the benchmark. Obviously, we have 32. And this is a good hard drive because it is 7200 RPM, and well, honestly, the graph itself pretty much explains the entire thing. Now this is for sustained read, but if we go to pretty much every single one of these, yeah, we're going into actually really fast territory for a hard drive. Now it is a bit slower on the random, at least with the smaller capacities, but I mean, still, this is fantastic, and well, yeah. It's awesome to see that the hard drive is not only in good health, but it's also operating really well. Yeah, it's a hard drive, not an SSD, but then again, this is of course a 1,1 Mac Pro, and we are running macOS Lion, so for this era of Macintosh, this is very good. What's also cool about this program is that it has benchmark information all the way back to a G3 400 MHz blue and white, and well, yeah. At this point it literally is off the charts, but then again it's not really that fair of a comparison because this is SATA and the G3 is obviously, first of all, a different processor, and secondly, those were still using IDE drives, which in themselves are still decent, you know, for the era, but even if we go up to the 2.0 gigahertz G5. Interestingly enough, the iMac, at least the 2.4 gigahertz version here, now I think this program is from like 2009, 2010, so around that era of more modern computing. I guess it does make sense that it's a bit faster if this is a newer Intel model, and the 2.66 gigahertz with less RAM actually reports higher, but still doesn't beat the benchmarks that we have, so very awesome to see. You could probably notice that, well, the Mac itself here is not super noisy. with 2 hard drives inside. Apparently I have 83 gigabytes of iTunes content. And yeah, this is going to be busy for a while. iTunes is now officially on the hard drive itself. As you can see, we have 915 gigabytes free, which is awesome. And I honestly wasn't expecting it to be 83 gigabytes. Honestly, with half of the stuff in this iTunes library, I have no idea what I actually have. Some of this stuff is just from like iPods and random things like that. So I'm sure that if I actually like sort everything and get rid of what I don't want, or if I want to save space, I'm sure this would decrease. Now storage is not going to be any problem at all. Let's try to actually open up iTunes on the new hard drive. We now have iTunes on the Mac Pro itself. No hard drive at all. As you can see, we don't have it here. So we do have music here. We can skip tracks. And it's actually pretty funny to hear it without the hard drive noise, because this would always make noise, as you heard earlier. Now obviously the Mac itself is not like a 100% silent machine, but in comparison, I mean, the only noise we have here is the cassette itself on the camera and the music here. It's now the Mac Pro that's the core component of iTunes. And even though this is of course still a standard hard drive, this is now like instantaneous. There is no delay at all. I can skip between tracks without a problem. This is going to be such a huge improvement that I guess I won't fully realize until I actually start using it. The Dell has given us the equipment that we need to upgrade our far more ancient computer, and yes, it would be nice to use this system in the future. And yes, I probably could have kept the hard drive in this, because I'm sure 1 terabyte with Windows would also be nice. But when it comes to, well, pro desktops like this, I really could use the storage, because iTunes is always busy here in the iTunes setup. It's almost like it's named after iTunes, huh? So this is not going to be the last time we will see this Dell, and I'm sure we could do a whole lot with this. But for now though, the ultimate iTunes setup continues to become more awesome. If it wasn't crazy enough with the 32 gigabytes of RAM, now we have over 1 terabyte of free storage available, and that's only with 2 hard drives in it. In the future, I'm sure I will deal with this as well. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as is, because I still want to make sure that this hard drive is completely operational. And with that, we have over 51 minutes recorded on our tape so far. Now obviously this is not going to be a 51-minute long video, but I think that this is a good spot to wrap it up, because we took a look at this Dell, we upgraded the Mac Pro, and we transferred iTunes onto its new hard drive. If you enjoyed today's video and the HDV quality here, then consider leaving a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content recorded on HDV, then let me know. This is the first time I'm really using this camcorder as an actual camcorder, and even though the zoom is still a bit iffy, it does seem to work perfectly fine. Honestly, this is like the first time I've recorded this much on tape, at least with a tape-based camcorder, and it also feels different to record constant video, I guess, at least in comparing it to the iPhone. But with the camcorder here, usually most of the clips would actually be, you know, multiple minutes at the shortest. So I am noticing that I am changing the way I'm recording with the camcorder here. But then again, this is also tape-based, and I also don't want to put a lot of stop and start motions on the tape itself. I'd rather keep it recording and edit out what I don't need. But it is very interesting to use. It's fun to actually use a, you know, like an actual camera, not just an iPhone. So holding it here, having a proper tripod mount, it's definitely a different experience, because I've always been using iPhones for the most part. I know that there are some videos on the channel where I have used other camcorders, and the convenience of HDV is that it's a completely digital copy. I don't have to deal with any nonsense with video converters. All I have to do is plug it into a Mac like this one or that one, or well, if that one did work. But I do actually have a dedicated DV setup for this, and really that's the only downside with tape so far, is that obviously there is wear and tear on the mechanism, but I'm not really counting that because that's just how tape is. You do of course have to wait in real time for the tape itself to transfer. You know, you could just leave it to transfer and do something in the meantime. And it's really not that different from like leaving a video to render. It's going to take time regardless, but this is just another cool and fun way to actually use this old equipment and, you know, not just have it on display somewhere. But it's just so cool to see, you know, one by one, slowly adding more and more hardware onto the setup here. As it is right now, this Dell is obviously not operational because there's no hard drive, but this is going to be a fun project in the future, and I guess I have more to do with the Mac now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.